you ask, well, what is classical PE? Well, you know, we like to think of it from a period of about 1885 to 1920. But it was going on before then, and some of the classical methods existed after 1920, and some never went away because people like us are still using Indian clubs and health wands and things in a very classical form way, but it was very much marginalized as America adopted more of a sport approach. At one point, the United States had the best of the best because everyone came here. So we had the Czech Sokols, we had the Germans, we had the Swedish here, we had the Asian influences, and you know, we had it all. We had the best of the best, and we, you know, there were, depending on what city you lived in the United States, you had a little more Germanic influence or maybe a little more Swedish influence, but in a sense, they were all kind of the same because they oftentimes cited ancient Greece. Sound mind, sound body was key. The movement quality was key. The posture alignment was key. And then there was an aesthetic quality. And there was a very big emphasis on mental stability, which is what I oftentimes highlight in my presentations when I'm talking about classical PE. It just wasn't about exercise and fitness. It was about creating sound mental health. The term was mental stability. They use that often. And when we look around today, 2021, we see that our children are in desperate need of mental stability, especially post-pandemic. And these are the things that proper physical education should be addressing. However, today's PE does not. He was the most gracious gentleman. And one of the questions I asked him when I interviewed him was, how often did you get hurt? And he paused, and he kind of reflectively thought about it for a moment. He goes, I think I strained my leg once, and a light went on in my head. And I thought, because if you've looked at Muscle Beach history at all, especially the classical era with all these amazing pyramids, these human pyramids, and they're throwing these women through the air, and they're doing these swan dive arch, you know, things, and catching them, and amazing acrobatics, and no injuries.
Wow.
And at that point, I knew we were really missing something today. They were one of the four horsemen in restorative arts and classical PE, which was medicine balls, which came from ancient Greece, light dumbbells, the light wooden dumbbells, which they use completely differently than like Arnold doing bicycles. Indian clubs, which, you know, we have them displayed behind us, and we love those. And then the health wands. And the wand was a leverage tool. And of all the four horsemen, I prefer the wands because they're the easiest to use and the most accessible. And I think you get the most bang for your buck in the least amount of time. Well, J.B. Nash wrote the book in 1932 called Spectatoritis, and it was a national conversation. It's part of my research in leisure, which is, to me, the most important thing I should be talking about, is the classical idea of leisure in ancient Greece, which is when you're not eating, sleeping, and going to school or work. You're spending your free time doing what? In the classical sense, you should be learning and elevating culture, and not just spending it in passive amusement. What would that be like? Well, if you're just playing video games over and over, that's passive amusement. If you're just watching mindless stuff on YouTube or TikTok, or you know, there are ways to, you know, watch things that can be uplifting or educational or learning. And I know that might sound like really drab and boring to people, but if you look at back at history, that is what determines a nation's success or failure, is how they spend their leisure time. And so, as a history person, I can just look at how most Americans spend their free time and know we're in real trouble. It does matter, because when you look at the soaring youth sport injuries we have today, and the joint replacements, and major joint reconstruction that sometimes is going on now with teenagers. I mean, I don't think people realize what's going on just at the high school level with joint issues. It's frightening. And the root cause of that is we're not teaching people how to move well from the get-go. What history says is no nation will continue without that type of PE. So we're at a real crossroads today. And this is why the message is so important. This conversation is important. The presentations I've been doing this year to influential groups is important. Because we really, as I pitched a couple weeks ago in the keynote symposium, is we need a national PE initiative. And it needs to be top down. The grassroots efforts are fine, the gyms are fine, the families working with their children, that's all important. But at this point, we need something coming out of Washington, D.C. that's bipartisan. I don't care what party gets behind it, but someone needs to do it, and soon. It's because if not, we might not be able to have this kind of a conversation in the near future. Yeah, it's that important. Get behind the philosophy of movement, get behind the history, that's the rudder on the ship, and then apply it to your situation and keep your eye on the horizon, because I'm working with some key people nationally to re-energize and rejuvenate physical education. And I sincerely hope that it works, because this is the time.